Welcome to FO Talks. Joining me from Peru's capital is Erik Geurts. Erik is a consultant, and you may recall him from our previous discussion on Peru. Today we're going to talk about Bolivia. The country has a newly elected president. His name is Rodrigo Paz. Paz is a centrist and the son of former President Jaime Paz Zamora. Erik, let's start with the big picture. How would you characterize Rodrigo Paz's win? Is this a turning point for Bolivia, or is it mostly anti-incumbency?
No, it's definitely a turning point in Bolivia, whereby there will be a shift in economic model, because the former model, the model that is still in place actually, is this model of socialism of the 21st century. And it has come to an end, this model. It cannot deliver anymore. It has been exhausted. And in order to repair the economy, it needs to be changed. And there will be definitely more focus on the private sector, private investments. At least Bolivia will try to get private investments, to stimulate private enterprise, and to insert Bolivia again into the world economy, which will also have political consequences. Whereas Bolivia was one of the few countries in South America that prioritized relationships with Russia, China, Iran, and of course with Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. It will now seek better relationships with Argentina, with Chile, and with the United States. So yes, it is a big change. If that change will be for a long time or not, we don't know yet. Typically in Bolivia, we saw like 20-year cycles. You had the cycle between 1985, when there was an economic shock therapy to save the country from a deep crisis, until 2005, when Evo Morales came to power with his socialism of the 21st century. And that cycle has now come to an end with a new crisis, actually.
Right, let's talk about Rodrigo Paz a little bit, because during the first round of election, he trailed heavily in the opinion polls, but then he did pull off a win in the first round. He got the most amount of votes, but not enough for a majority. And then in the second round, he was up against Tuto Quiroga, a heavyweight. And yet Rodrigo Paz has managed to win the presidential election. It's almost like a Cinderella story. Can you tell us some of the main reasons of why he won in Bolivia?
Yeah, I think Bolivians were not ready for the kind of shock therapy that Tuto Quiroga was promising. Jaime Paz was a little bit more like a populist. He promised many things, and somehow he did not talk too much about the consequences of the economic politics that he will need to implement. So he used some I would say hollow phrases like platita para todos, which is a little bit of money for everyone, popular capitalism, and that sounds like, oh, that's great. We will not suffer too much, and everyone will have a little bit of money. So somehow I think that convinced people not to vote for Tutu Quiroga, who was quite direct on what he was going to do, and who also mentioned that he was going to appeal to the IMF. And there is still a big inheritance from the past 20 years, from the socialism of the 21st century, whereby the IMF is a kind of the enemy of the country, who is like squeezing countries and bringing too much capitalism and injustice to countries. So with all these perceptions in the population, especially the poorer segments of the population, he was the more friendly guy. And I think that was the way in which he was getting the vote.
Do you think he's going to open up the economy the way he has promised? Because Bolivia has had years of socialism, and it's been more than 2 decades when Mars was in power. And for our viewers, that is Movement for Socialism, the party in Bolivia that was in power for almost 2 decades. Now, if a party is in power for 2 decades, they've created a whole ecosystem around them where it's going to be about socialism. So how difficult do you think is it going to be for Rodrigo Paz to just come in and switch to maybe a more open economy for Bolivia?
Yeah, he will find resistance, but he will especially find resistance from those who may want to cling to power from the past times. And he will have to make some changes, especially to the judicial powers, to the prosecutors' offices, etc. Because there they appointed all party members from the mass. So that there needs to be a change in the staff of those organizations, without any doubt. The good thing is, though, that he will have the uh, uh, he will have the support from Parliament to do this. Because together with two other parties, they have almost 80 or more than 80% of Parliament, and those three parties are all pro-business. And that includes the party of Tuto Quiroga, who already offered that he would support Paz. Now he accepted that he has lost the elections. The second, or the third largest party, is of a rich Bolivian entrepreneur, a businessman called Doria Medina, Samuel Doria Medina. And he himself, as a student, was a member of the Revolutionary Party that was founded by his father, the father of Rodrigo Paz, the former President Jaime Paz Zamora. And Jaime Paz Zamora, with some of the people from his presidency, was also supporting his son in the campaign, because he is a seasoned politician in Bolivia. Then there is another coincidence. Samuel Doria Medina lent his two most important consultants, um, staff members, to Rodrigo Paz. One of them is Jose Luis Lupo. And who is Jose Luis Lupo? Jose Luis Lupo was a minister in the government of Tuto Quiroga. So he was even the most important minister. He was like the prime minister, and later on the interior minister, in the years that Tuto Quiroga was president, when General Banzer died. He was the president and Tuto Quiroga was his vice president. So there are a lot of interconnections between those three parties, which is also good because the party that backed Rodrigo Paz was a kind of a very unimportant party. Um, and um, in fact, they adopted Rodrigo, who had his own movement in the south of the country, where he is from, and he joined with the forces of this Captain Lara, this former police officer who denounced corruption within the government and the police. So it is a little bit of everything, and also because of this growth of this party on the back of Rodrigo Paz, um, you have all kinds of people there with all kinds of different interests and not too experienced in politics.
Hmm.
So, in fact, the other two parties bring experience to the game, and they are the ones that may be more supportive, after all, for his government than his own party and his own vice president, who is also a controversial person.
Eric, let's talk about the two challenges that Rodrigo Paz is going to face: social and economic. And I'll begin with the economic. Bolivia's economy has been struggling with declining exports, especially for gas. There's been inflation. There is fiscal strain on the economy. What? How do you see him navigating these economic challenges as he sets up his new administration?
Yeah, although he did not talk too much about it, he basically needs to do what Tuto Quiroga said he was going to do if he would become president. So uh, probably he will need to go to the IMF, because without the IMF, multilateral banks will also not lend to Bolivia. Um, Maybe he will also try to copy a little bit what Javier Milei from Argentina did, namely go to President Trump,
Hmm.
which will come, of course, at a price, at a cost. So um, he will need to get dollars by loans, by getting loans. Loans come with a string, of course, um, which may then cause social unrest. We have to wait and see what is going to happen, because the population also understands that something needs to happen.
Mhm.
And uh, the main problem he will face is the currency, because part of the problems that Bolivia is facing right now is because the president that will be leaving, who was the finance minister of Evo Morales before he became president, fixed the currency, the exchange rate of the currency, I must say, at an overvalued exchange rate. And because of that, the country was more prone to importing than to exporting. And since 80% of the population is informal, many of them working as petty traders, it was like great. You could import cheaply a lot of things that you could sell on the markets in Bolivia. And this all worked quite well when there was a boom for the export produce of Bolivia, which was mainly gas, natural gas.
Mhm.
The other thing that happened is that there was no independent central bank. They used the central bank mainly as their checking account. So they nationalized the gas industry. They exported gas at prices that were that were rising. That were rising. You had the mineral boom in Latin America, but they spent the money then. They spend it on subsidies. They spend it on prestige projects like football stadiums, even an international airport in the middle of nowhere, which happened to be the home area of Evo Morales, and all those kind of things. But they did not reinvest in their oil and gas industry. So they run out of reserves without exploring new reserves. And that is how the model got stuck. And at the same time, it meant that the private sector could not export because the Bolivian produce was too expensive because of the overvalued exchange rate. There were also all kinds of controls. For instance, if meat prices would go up in the Bolivian market, then the Bolivian government would not give you a license to export beef. And then you had to sell it on the home market at lower prices. So all kinds of limits to the private sector, which mainly affected, by the way, the eastern lowlands of the country, where you have the agribusiness and where you have most of the private enterprise of the country. So, to come back to your question, it may very well be that Rodrigo Paz may have to float the exchange rate, which will then, of course, create a huge devaluation. He says he's not going to do this. He will have a kind of a crawling back. But crawling back does not solve the issue of overvaluation of the currency, as we are also seeing right now in Argentina, where they are doing the same.
Right. Let's talk about the social challenges that Rodrigo Paz also has to deal with. Bolivia
Yeah.
has seen years of polarization, and it's been between the highlands and the lowlands, between indigenous and urban voters. How do you think Paz is going to bridge these divides?
Yes, that will indeed become a challenge. Um, the good thing is that like 70% of the population is urban and are therefore also inserted into the economy. And they will all want some changes. There is, for instance, no diesel, no gasoline, there are no dollars, and they want all these things. So if he can get them dollars, if he can get them gasoline and diesel, then I think the population, a large part of the population, will support him. But you will always have these people that are from the MAS, the party that was founded, among others, by Evo Morales. And Evo Morales himself, because remind that the Evo Morales was not at a good footing with the president that is now leaving. They were also fighting amongst each other, and Evo Morales is now leaving the MAS and creating his own party, Evo Pueblo, and he wants to become politically active and become president again. And he has his people in his home area, the Chapare region, which is mainly an area of coca growers near the third city, Cochabamba, who really see him like a kind of a messiah. They made create some trouble for Rodrigo Paz. They can block roads because Cochabamba is conveniently located at the center of the country. And they can also have protest marches even to La Paz and so on. That will be a challenge will be a challenge for him. Tuto Quiroga was very clear about this. Tuto Quiroga said, well, you know, when I'm president, I'll arrest Evo Morales, and he may even be extradited to the United States. Rodrigo Paz has been more careful because he needed the ones who voted, who used to vote before for Evo Morales, in order to win the elections. That is what I see as his main challenge. But again, if he can get some dollars to the country, some fuel, and stabilize the economy a bit, then people will keep supporting him.
Yeah. Let's zoom out a little bit out of Bolivia. You're in Peru, you're in Peru's capital, Lima. Peru, of course, is a neighboring country. But how are the other players in the region reading what has happened in Bolivia? Because it's not just about Bolivia now. There's a clear trend in Latin America and South America. You're in Peru, you spoke about how the president was removed, and this was right before the election. We've had a government change now in Bolivia. In Argentina, Javier Milei is back with a bang. So, how is the election in Bolivia being read across the region?
Yeah, what I have heard is that it is being seen as a kind of a trend against this socialism of the 21st century. That it's a cycle coming to an end. You still have left-wing governments in Brazil and Colombia, but somehow these are not the kind of left-wing governments like we have seen in Argentina, Bolivia, and also Ecuador with Rafael Correa, or now in Venezuela, where the state was becoming the main economic actor in the country. So in that sense, Colombia and Brazil are a bit different, but it's being seen as that. We saw that Kirchneristas, the people that follow the Kirchner family in Argentina, the Peronists, have tried to influence elections in Bolivia because they wanted Rodrigo Paz to win the elections. And they did not want Tuto Quiroga to win because Tuto was a clear ally of Milei in Argentina. But nonetheless, the fact that Rodrigo Paz has won the elections means that the period of socialism has come to an end in Bolivia. And I think that is one of the observations that I hear from other countries about what is happening in Bolivia.
Erik, thank you for sharing your insights and regional perspective. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Rohan. It was a pleasure for me to share a little bit my observations in this region with you and readers and viewers of Fair Observer.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.